Hi friends, I'm back! First of all, thank you so much for all of your well wishes after my community post, and thanks for hanging in there. This video has been a long time coming. So it's currently Sunday the 30th of June, which means we are officially at the halfway point of my 1-year challenge. Where is the freaking time gone? So today's video was filmed and edited over the course of a 5-week period, basically in between illnesses and some other things that were going on. But we've got a lot to catch up on, so settle in, make yourself a cup of tea, and let us have a good old-fashioned chin wag. Hi everyone, my name's Jake. Welcome to the Kitchen Scrap, where I'm currently challenging myself to learn to survive on British World War II rations for an entire year.
There's always something, isn't there?
It's been a minute.
You know, I've been sick.
But I am better now.
So I originally recorded this video weeks ago, but there were a number of things that I completely forgot to talk about. So I decided I'd simply re-record it, and then I got sick. Twice. Anyways, we're back at it again. I'm sitting at a solid 85% at the moment, so for the time being, we're just going to keep calm and carry on. So it's currently Tuesday, the 28th of May, which means I've been living on British World War II rations for 149 days. So I thought it was about time to check in and discuss how it's all been going so far. Because let me tell you, it hasn't exactly been a walk in the park.
Because it's horrible, painful, friendless grind.
Okay, maybe it's not that bad, but it hasn't been without its challenges, believe me. Now, I'm guessing a number of you might have a few questions, such as, has he fallen off the wagon? Has he cheated? Do you think he's lost any weight? What does he do when he's invited to a restaurant or a cafe? Is he saving any money? Is it really as difficult as it appears to be? Wasn't he going to try and quit coffee? Now, I'm going to address all of those questions right here, right now. Total transparency and honesty. So let's get down to business. So the first topic of conversation is coffee. Now, coffee wasn't rationed during the war, however, it was difficult to come by. Mostly what people had access to was something called camp coffee, which was made out of roasted chicory and sometimes roasted acorns. Yummy. That being said, they didn't actually have the coffee culture that we know and love today back in 1940s Britain, so tea was definitely the preferred beverage of the time. Now, for anyone that saw my first video, which was an introduction to my year of rationing, I stated that in solidarity with our brothers and sisters of yesteryear, I was going to attempt to give up coffee for an entire year. And I'm happy to report that so far in 2024, I have not had a single drop of coffee. Nothing, nada, zip. So coming from someone that drank 3 coffees a day for the best part of 25 years, I can't actually believe that I've given up the coffee. Now, some of you may be wondering, but Jake, how does that make you feel? It feels a little something like this. Well, not anymore, but let me walk you through that first week. So January 1st, 2024 was my first day without coffee. And I'm not gonna lie, I was a little cocky. I remember walking around my apartment that night thinking, oh my God, this is so easy. And then, the next day, I was irritable.
Coffee. I want my coffee.
Slightly desperate and a little obsessive.
I can't seem to get enough of it. I've got to have that coffee.
And during what I could only describe as my mid-morning acrobatic mood swings, things that would never normally annoy me were really p***ing me off.
Boy, you are really not a morning person. Back off!
The hardest part was definitely the morning time, because what would happen is I would wake up and then I'd remember that I couldn't have coffee. That was really sad. Now, typically speaking, the tea ration for each adult per week was 2 ounces. Now, here's the thing. I was so paranoid that I was going to run out of my tea ration that week that I was barely putting in 1 teaspoon of loose leaf into my teapot. So when it was time for my morning cup of tea, it really wasn't packing that punch and giving me that wake-up call that I so desperately need in the mornings. So I was in struggle town, big time. But by the end of the first week, I was surprised at how much tea I actually had left over. So from then on, I realized that I could safely put 2 teaspoons worth of loose leaf into the teapot, and it made the world of difference. Now, I feel very fortunate because I'm not someone that typically gets headaches very often, and if I do, it has to be a pretty bad one for me to reach for the painkillers. Now, I don't know if this was strictly related to coffee or caffeine withdrawal during that first week, but on day 4 and 5 at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was hit with a splitting headache, both days at the same time. It was so bad, it felt like someone had driven a rusty railroad spike through my skull, and I definitely had to take painkillers those 2 days. But after that rocky first week start, I've been totally fine. When I walk past cafes in the city and I can smell all that gorgeous coffee brewing, sure, it smells great, but it doesn't actually set off any cravings. Now, I don't know if you'll remember this, but going back to my first video again, I purchased some of this caffeine-free fake coffee, which is made out of roasted chicory, barley, and rye. I purchased this under the assumption that I was really going to struggle through those first few weeks without coffee. I've barely touched it. I think I had a total of about 5 cups, and they were all in the first week of January. It's still basically full. It's not unpleasant to drink at all. It's just that I haven't really needed to turn to it once I got the strength of my tea sorted out. Now, coffee has always been one of those things I've always considered a basic necessity, so I never really thought too much about how much I was actually spending on it until I quit drinking it. So since the pandemic, for my main job, I typically work hybrid, so it's 3 days in the office and 2 days at home. Now, when I'm working in the office, my first point of call is always to the closest cafe, where I'll buy a large latte with 2 sugars, which costs me $5 a pop. Now, 3 of those every week is $15 or $60 a month. Now, I also have coffee at home, of course, and I worked out that I was spending approximately $24 a month on that, which actually isn't too bad, but when you tally it all up, I was spending $84 a month just on coffee, which means I'm saving $1,008 a year just from cutting coffee out of my diet. That's a mortgage payment. That's a return plane ticket to Thailand. So when I actually sat down and looked at the figures, I was quite surprised. So let's move on to the actual rations. Now, here is a list of the typical weekly rations for an adult living in 1940s Britain. Now, of course, all of these would fluctuate, sometimes quite heavily, subject to availability throughout the war and the rationing period, which was close to 15 years. But generally speaking, this is what the Ministry of Food deemed an appropriate amount for each adult per week to live on, not including non-rationed items like fruit and veg, of course. Now, something I discovered quite quickly was just how different this diet is compared to my own. Now, that probably sounds a little silly given I knew what I was getting myself into heading into this challenge, but let me explain. Bacon, I never eat it. Ham, almost never. Now, when it comes to the meat, once upon a time, I was a staunch vegetarian for over 10 years.
Stauanch. There's nothing worse, I'm telling you.
These days, I would say that 90% of the food that I prepare for myself is either vegetarian or vegan, but I cannot claim to be either because I do eat meat on occasion. So when I'm cooking at home for myself, very occasionally I'll cook some chicken or fish. Most of the time, if I'm eating meat, it's because I'm going out to a restaurant or a cafe, or I'm going to someone's house, and if they've taken the time to prepare me a lovely lunch or dinner that has meat in it, I'll eat it. I call myself a flexitarian in that regard. But yes, predominantly speaking, I do prefer a plant-based diet. Now, so far for this challenge, I've been using plant-based meat substitutes just so I can experiment with some of the recipes. I typically never eat that kind of stuff anyways. Number one, it's hideously expensive. Number two, it doesn't taste that great, with the exception of the bacon. Now, I did originally purchase some of that for my first video. It was purely for demonstrative purposes, and I was actually quite surprised at how yummy it was. But the problem is, it costs $8 for 4 slices. So as nice as that was, even if I was only purchasing a packet of that every 2 weeks, that would cost me $208 this year just on the bacon ration alone. So I'm going without. Now, the whole 1 egg per week thing is another interesting one. I've mentioned this in a previous video, but I typically don't eat a lot of eggs. And if I do purchase them, it's usually for when I'm baking. But these wartime recipes are quite thrifty, and most of the time they try to avoid using eggs. So I haven't really needed to use that many. I used 3 in January, 2 in April for the pierogi. Oh, I did get the midnight munchies one night and I made some pancakes. But other than that, I haven't really used any eggs, so I'm technically owed a whole bunch of them. Moving on to the fats, it's too much for one person, at least for me. 2 ounces of butter, 4 ounces of margarine, and 4 ounces of lard. When it comes to the lard, I've never cooked with it before. I don't intend to. That was one of the switches that I made this year. So instead of lard, I'm using 4 ounces of extra virgin olive oil. I'll always get through my butter ration, and most of the time I only get through half of my margarine ration, but it depends on if I'm baking that week. If I am, I'll definitely get through it. But yeah, as for the lard, or in my case, the extra virgin olive oil, it's too much. So I've actually just stopped measuring it because I am simply not getting through it each week. As for the milk, this one I still struggle with. Oh, it's so hard. I used to make my own chocolate milk, or I'd like to cap off the evening with a luscious hot chocolate. I'd flip the quantity so it was predominantly milk with just a little bit of water. I just stick the milk in my milk frother so it's all thick and creamy and just gorgeous. I'm still struggling to live on 1.7 liters a week. The milk powder has saved my butt. I bought a 1 kilo bag at the start of the year, and I've still got about a third of it left, which is fantastic. To mix it up and drink it on its own, forget it. But using it in baking or whacking it in a soup to make it nice and creamy, works a treat. Totally converted, I will always keep some on hand. Okay, the sugar ration. This is something that has since been adjusted. This is a day for honesty. For the last 20 years, I've been drinking honey in my tea. Now, last Christmas, I was gifted a tub of honey, which I burnt through in like 2 weeks. So once that was gone, I had to try and adapt to having sugar in my tea instead, which I hate with every fiber of my being. I don't like it. Even though honey is also a sweetener, I don't like the taste of sugar in my tea. Now, in both of my jobs, I have to talk a lot. So having honey in my tea really helps to soothe my throat. Now, I soldiered on for 2.5 months having sugar in my tea, and I just couldn't do it anymore. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have been told by multiple sources, and I've also read online, that honey wasn't rationed during the war. Again, it was just one of those things that was kind of difficult to come by. And they did have something called imitation honey. And someone asked me a good question recently, which was, how did they make imitation honey? What did they put in it? I don't actually know. Was it like dandelion honey? So if anyone does happen to know the answer, please let us know in the comment section. Anyways, based on this technicality that honey wasn't actually rationed, I made the executive decision to go back to having honey in my tea. I don't have it on toast or use it as a sweetener, it's purely for my tea. Now, after a week of this, I realized I had barely touched my sugar ration, which is 8 ounces a week. So what I decided to do to try and counteract and balance this was reduce my sugar ration to 3 ounces a week. And to be honest, now that I've gone back to having honey in my tea, I'm barely getting through 3 ounces of sugar a week. Some weeks I definitely do, but again, it depends on if I'm baking. I am gonna try and stick to that 3 ounces a week, unless I'm baking some extravagant wartime dessert for the channel, and I might need just that little bit more, but technically I haven't even been getting through my 3 ounces a week as it is anyway. Cheating? Yes? No? Maybe? Either way, I will die on this hill. The cheese ration isn't really phasing me that much. I can go a couple of weeks without it, and I typically do. What I tend to do is go 1 week without, 1 week on. 1 week without, 1 week on. And my favorite way to have it is when I have my monthly baked beans on toast with lots of cheese. Oh, so good. There's definitely been a few times where I've been craving all of the cheese, but for the most part, I think I've handled that pretty well. So as for the jam or the preserves, you were allowed to have 1 pound every 2 months, and it's actually going pretty well. So at the beginning of the year, Mum gave me a jar of spiced apple jam that she'd made. I weighed it, it was actually 2 pounds, so I said in my first video this was gonna have to last me until, April, May. And it has. I really enjoy the flavor of this one, and what's great about it, it's one of those jams where less is more, which is why I've got so much left. So that's going well. Last but not least, the sweet ration. So you were entitled to 12 ounces every month. This one's up and down. I take the sweet ration as chocolate. Now, Ration Book Rebecca actually made a really good point in one of her videos, which I never forgot. So talking about the good stuff like chocolate and cheese, when you have such limited quantities to work with, you really have to make it the star of the show. And she's absolutely right. As an example, on Anzac Day, someone posted a wartime Anzac biscuit recipe in the Facebook group, and I actually made it. And I added half of my monthly chocolate ration to the Anzac biscuits. They were spectacular. So good, in fact, that I made them again the next week and used the remainder of my monthly chocolate ration. And my camera died. Anyways, what was I saying? So I was talking about sweets, and what I was going to say is that I've learned to find joy and satisfaction in the simpler things. For example, at the end of the evening, sometimes it's just nice to have a couple of pieces of toast with a little bit of jam, make a bowl of porridge and chuck a few dates in there, sometimes have a hot chocolate, or just a nice sweet cup of tea is enough to feel satiated. So while it's great that most vegetables weren't rationed, there are definitely some things that I am really missing. Cooking with onions, garlic, ginger, chili, citrus, avocados, chickpeas, coconut milk, watermelon. Oh, I miss them so much. Now, I really don't mean to sound like I'm complaining, because God bless those people that had to live through this for close to 15 years. I'm only doing it for one. One of the things I have been struggling with is the repetition. Not so much in the dishes, more so the flavors. They are very similar. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of the dishes are quite delicious, but it's much of the same, just presented in different ways.
It's liver on Monday, so it on Tuesday. Liver on Wednesday, so it on Thursday. Fish and chips on Friday. On Saturday, it's a surprise, and it's a roast on the Sabbath.
So another very valuable lesson that I've learned so far is the importance of planning. Living on this diet, you're essentially making everything from scratch. Now, I am also making my own bread. I'm using a wartime loaf recipe from Caroline's website, which is great, but you really do have to plan ahead and make sure you have enough ingredients to cook with, or that you've done a couple of bulk cooks and there's always something to just grab. Because let me tell you, there have been a few occasions where I've had the day from hell at work and I've got home, I have nothing in the cupboards, I haven't been grocery shopping, I had no meals prepped, and those are the moments that can break you. Because it's so tempting to just say, screw it, jump onto Uber Eats and order 50 pizzas. Now, I've had quite a few questions about what I do for breakfasts and lunches, which I'm going to address in a future video, but for now, when it comes to lunches, mostly what I'll do is just have a smaller portion of whatever I've cooked for dinner. But I'll delve more deeply into this at a later stage. Next topic, weight loss. Alright, so it's been 5 months. Have I lost any weight? The answer is yes, indeed, I have. So I don't actually own any scales, but my parents do. When I was staying there over Christmas, I weighed myself. I believe it was the 27th of December, which now that I think about it, is probably the worst time that you can weigh yourself, you know, after a few days of just gorging yourself on all of that Christmas food and leftovers. Nonetheless, that's what I did. So I'm quite tall, I'm 6'2", and during the pandemic, I was working from home full time and I stacked on a lot of weight. I think I put on about 15 kilos, and while I've been able to shake off some of that in the last year or two, it's been tough and I feel like it's just kind of stuck to me. Anyways, on the 27th of December last year, I weighed 104 kilos. So fast forward to Easter, which I think was the end of March, so basically 3 months later, I was back down at my parents' house and I weighed myself again, and I weighed 98 kilos. So I lost 6 kilos without even trying.
That's great!
I'm quite pleased with that because that was purely down to diet. My exercise routine hasn't changed. Not that I have an exercise routine. I don't go to the gym, but I do walk a lot, so I guess that's my main form of exercise. So the reason I'm happy it was only 6 kilos is because it happened slowly and naturally. It wasn't this big dramatic change. I think that would have been a little bit concerning. So on average, I'm losing 2 kilos a month, which is great. Now since then, I have definitely lost more. Even though I don't have scales, I can tell from the way I feel and looking in the mirror. Now the thing is, back then, I'm pretty sure the recommended calorie intake was 3,000 calories a day. However, you have to remember that most of these people were working full time, and a lot of the time it was also mandatory that they volunteered in some kind of service position in the evenings, on top of which they had families to look after, houses to clean, they would have to walk everywhere to buy their groceries, so their lives were very active and physically demanding, so they needed all of those extra calories. So when you think about it from that perspective, it makes sense that, you know, they got 4 ounces of lard, 4 ounces of margarine, and 2 ounces of butter every week. Now, while weight loss wasn't actually my end game for this 1-year challenge, it is a very welcome beneficial side effect. We all have something about our bodies that we don't like, except for you because you're beautiful. For me, whenever I put on weight, for some reason it always goes straight to my hips and I get man boobs. It really annoys me. But what's particularly frustrating about this, even though these are the first 2 places I'll put on weight, they are also the last 2 places where the weight comes off. That doesn't seem fair to me.
That is not fair.
That is not fair! That is not fair!
I've still got a decent handful here, and until these babies stop jiggling, I won't be happy. I want these to look like 2 aspirins on an ironing board. Then I'll be happy. Hi friends, it's now Wednesday the 29th of May. It was getting too late last night and my throat was beginning to hurt, so I just had to wrap it up. Alright, the next topic is restaurants. Now, heading into this challenge, when it comes to eating out at restaurants and cafes, I was always going to approach it from a practical standpoint. After all, I am living on self-imposed restrictions here. We have a number of special events this year with some big important family birthdays, and there's a wedding I have to attend later in the year, and most of the time we'll be doing like a big cook-up or going out to a fancy restaurant where it's just not going to be practical for me to stick to the rations. I can't imagine going to a restaurant and sitting there just not eating anything purely because they don't have any ration-friendly food. That's just ridiculous. So yes, in that regard, there are a few occasions where I have and will break free from the rations. Now, when it came to eating out at restaurants during the war, it may surprise some of you to learn that people actually ate out at restaurants more often than you would think. So initially, private restaurants were actually exempt from rationings, but it soon became evident that people that were well-to-do had an unfair advantage because they could afford to eat out more often and stretch out their rations. So to combat this, rules were put into place which meant that no more than 3 courses could be served at any time, and the price was also capped at 5 shillings, which limited both the amount and types of food that could be served given the shortages. Now, at some stage during 1940 or 1941, the Ministry of Food began setting up community feeding centres, which were essentially just communal kitchens to help feed those in need. For example, if your house had been bombed out during the Blitz or you'd run out of ration coupons. But anyone was free to dine there. Winston Churchill later changed the name of these establishments to British restaurants, and by 1943 there were over 2,000 of them operating across the country. So churches and clubhouses were typically used to house these establishments because they typically already had basic working kitchens. So the meals were very cheap and they were typically 3 courses. However, no one could be served more than 1 serving of any kind of meat, fish, cheese, or eggs in one sitting. So these British restaurants were very popular because not only did they help to eke out your weekly rations, they also provided people with an opportunity to socialize and enjoy a meal that they didn't have to prepare themselves, allowing for some much needed relief from the daily war grind, which helped to boost morale, even if only for a moment. So it's time for my confession. So with my main job, which I've been working in for nearly 12 years now, even though I typically work full-time hours, I'm technically casual. Now in my line of work, January tends to be the quietest month of the year while we're still waiting for more projects to come in. So with that in mind, leading up to January 2024, I decided that I was going to take a break from work. I had some long service leave owing, so I decided that would be the perfect time to take it, especially this year, so I could settle into my ration challenge and get my YouTube channel up and going, which is what I did. And I'll also mention this, in January, I literally filmed every single thing that I made. Everything. And most of those videos will stay in the vault forever, because I had no idea what I was doing. Anyways, when it was time to go back to work in February, the project that we were counting on to start was delayed. Now, because I'm considered casual, that meant shifts were scarce. And for the first time in over 10 years, I realized I was going to have to get a second job, which terrified me because it had been such a long time since I'd had to look for work. And also, as exciting as it can be to get a new job, I hate that first week of starting a new job. You just feel like such an idiot. You don't know anything, you don't know anyone. It just feels so awkward until you find your rhythm. Anyways, about a year ago, one of my friends opened up a Mexican bar and restaurant. I was chatting to her one day and I realized I should ask if they're hiring at the moment. And as it turns out, they were. So one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was booked for a trial. Now, I was so nervous because until that point, I hadn't worked in hospitality in 20 years, so I was kind of panicking. So to help alleviate some of my concerns, what I decided to do was the night before my first shift, I booked myself a table. And the plan was to just go in and sample some of the food and just watch everything that was happening. Now, as it turns out, that was Valentine's Day, and they were packed to the rafters, which was actually great for me to see what it's like when it's really chaotic. And I'm really glad I did that because while I was still a bit nervous the next day, I wasn't as panicked as I originally was. Anyways, from my very first shift until this day, I would say about 80% of the customers will come in, read the menu, and then ask me, what do you recommend? And I realized pretty quickly that I'm in a bit of a pickle here because on one hand, I've just started this 1-year challenge where I'm supposed to be living on British World War II rations, and on the other, I've just landed this new job where I actually have to know about the food. So yes, I realized then that I was actually going to have to work my way through the menu. Now, one of the many great perks of working there is they offer you a free dinner and a free cocktail every shift. The universe was really throwing me a curveball here, and I grappled with this guilt for like 2 straight weeks. Eventually, I realized I just have to be practical about this. I can't reasonably provide good service with customers coming in and asking me, what do you recommend? And I just stand there with a vacant expression on my face going, I don't know. So I typically work there 3 nights, sometimes 2, depending on how busy we are. So I could be eating there 2 or 3 times a week, but I decided that I would only eat there once a week. I'd simply work my way through the menu and then call it a day. I was also able to eventually justify it from an economic perspective as well, because in today's cost of living crisis, I would be a fool to turn down a free, delicious dinner. So there's my confession. So while I am genuinely trying to be as authentic as possible living on British World War II rations for most of the time, for 1 meal a week, I am eating at a Mexican bar and restaurant. Now, if you were looking at it from the angle that yes, people did actually eat out at restaurants back then quite a lot, from that standpoint, technically, it's not cheating. But I guarantee you, they were not eating Mexican. In fact, going through all the wartime cookbooks that I've got, there's only one recipe with the word Mexican in it. And that can be found in this book here, which is
Good Eating, Suggestions for Wartime Dishes, a new selection of readers' tested recipes from the Daily Telegraph.
It's on page 50 and it's called Mexican Chocolate Whip. Now it does actually sound quite delicious, but I think the thing that makes it Mexican is that it contains 2 tablespoons of coffee essence. So I can't make it because I am determined not to have any coffee whatsoever this year. If it makes anyone feel any better, while I do genuinely look forward to my one, dare I say, cheat meal a week, you should also know that it actually makes going back to rations so much harder. I typically have that meal on a Friday night, so come Saturday when it's back to living on rations again, it's tough. But as I said earlier in the video, full transparency and total honesty in this video. Okay, so moving on now. Next topic, Takeout, or lack thereof. Now, on average, I would typically order takeout at least once a week, which was especially true during all of the lockdowns that Melbourne had to endure during the pandemic. I would typically always order pizza on a Saturday night. Pizza is my heroin. Now, there were definitely some very naughty weeks during the pandemic where I got takeout twice, sometimes 3 times a week, but on average over the last few years, it's safe to say that I would order takeout once a week. And it generally cost me about $35 a pop, including delivery, which means I was spending $1,820 a year on takeout. That really blows my mind because you just don't think of it at the time. It's like, oh, $35 here, $35 there, but it adds up very quickly. Now, I have actually ordered takeout once, but it was planned ahead of time. I knew I was going to do it. It was for my birthday, which was back in March, but I technically didn't break any rules because I ordered fish and chips. And believe it or not, fish and chips weren't actually rationed during the war because they were considered a morale booster. So there, and they were delicious. But yeah, I won't be ordering any more takeout. It was just for my birthday. I still can't quite believe I'm going to be saving $2,800 just from cutting out coffee and takeout from my diet. That's insanity. Which brings me to the last topic of overall savings. So before the pandemic and even during 2020, I was consistently spending around $75, $80 per week on my groceries, which was fairly reasonable. But by 2023, I worked out that I was consistently spending somewhere between $120 and $150 a week. While I generally try to be a frugal, savvy shopper, if I wanted any treats, I would get them. Or if I was testing out a recipe that required more expensive ingredients, I would get them. That being said, there was no escaping this insane inflation. Grocery prices have been out of control for the last 2 years, and we need to do something about it. So pre-rationing, working on an average weekly grocery spend of $120, I was spending about $480 a month on my groceries, which brings my yearly spend to approximately $5,760, give or take a little bit. So I've been keeping track of my grocery bill each week so far, and here are my monthly totals. As you can see, they definitely fluctuate. For example, in February, I included the amount that I spent at the bar the night before my first shift, because I did pay for my meal that night, and it was $58. And come April and May, I've really had to tighten the purse strings. So far, I've estimated that I've saved just under $1,200 on my grocery bill alone. And in terms of the actual rationed ingredients like your tea, sugar, fats, cheese, so on, I've worked out that it's costing about $58 a month for those alone. So once we factor in all the savings from the groceries, the coffee, and the takeout, I'm on track to save somewhere between $5,000 and $6,000 this year alone, just from living on British World War II rations. That's extraordinary, and given the climate right now and my own personal circumstances, it's very lucky that I'm living on rations this year. Just saying. Now, aside from everything that we've just spoken about, have I consciously cheated and broken the rules? And the honest answer is yes. There have been a few slip-ups here and there, but I've given up coffee, damn it. So back in early February, in the thick of summer, it was a stinking hot day and my parents came to visit, and I wanted to serve them something nice and refreshing, so I made them a fruit platter which did contain some watermelon and grapes. There was plenty left over and I happily devoured them, but I've given up coffee. Then in March, I was in the office one day and I was getting hangry. I just needed a sugar hit and I ended up buying a Snickers, which isn't so bad, except I'd already burnt through my monthly sweet ration. Naughty Jake. Did I mention I've given up the coffee? There were also a couple of times where I went to visit my parents and I may or may not have had a glass of Coca-Cola. And funnily enough, I rarely drink fizzy drinks. I don't keep them in the apartment. Basically, the only time I drink them is if I order a pizza. And there's no pizza happening this year, so... But in case you forgot, I've given up coffee. What else? There've been 2 separate occasions where I've been given some crumbed fish fillets, which came in a box. Total convenience item, you just bake them in the oven. And while fish technically wasn't rationed, I don't think they would have been getting crumbed fish fillets in a box from the supermarket. Aside from that, I think that's it. So yes, there have been a few slip-ups along the way, and I expected there would be. But overall, while it has been a very challenging experience, it's also been a very enlightening and enriching experience as well. I'm so happy I decided to give this a go, and I'm really looking forward to the next 6 months. Hey friends, it's now Sunday the 9th of June, and I have just come out the other side of a week of COVID hell. Wow, it's been a tough time. This has actually never happened to me before. I've been sick 3 times in about 5 weeks. I caught a cold just after Mother's Day. It knocked me out for about 4 or 5 days. That's fine, I got over it, or so I thought. So I jumped straight back into my busy work schedule, and apparently my body wasn't quite ready for that.
Big mistake. Big.
Huge.
And I ended up tumbling right back to square one again. So sick for a second time, but I was only down for 2 or 3 days that time. Anyways, I bounced back and I felt like I'd fully recharged. And then last weekend, I got COVID. I'll spare you all the details, but basically I've been in bed all week. But for the past 2 days, thankfully I've been a little bit more mobile and my symptoms have finally started to dissipate. Never in a million years did I think I'd be filming a recipe video right now, but here we are. In fact, it was never my intention to include a recipe in this video, but this is real life and I wanted to share a recipe with you all that's very near and dear to my heart. So just a heads up, the recipe I'm about to show you is not wartime, it's not authentic to the time, and I'll be using a lot of ingredients that people likely wouldn't have had access to back then. And for that, I hope that you will forgive me, but the reason I wanted to share it with you is because it is such a healthy, immunity boosting recipe, and my body has been screaming for this. And right now, after the week that I've just had, I need a shot of vitality, and this is my comfort food. Now, I actually did say in my first video that I was going to make this dish at some stage this year. The original plan though was that I was going to make a wartime ration friendly version of it, but right now I am trusting what my body is yearning for and we're just going to go for it. Now again, I don't know if any of you will remember, but as part of my Kickstarter pantry, I had one lonely little can of coconut milk that I'd found in my pantry, and the time has come to use it. So we're going to be making something called rainbow dansak, which is basically a vegetable curry. This recipe is totally vegan. It's very forgiving. You can essentially chuck anything you want into this. One of the things I love about this recipe is that I make a huge vat of it, which you're about to see. I freeze half of it because it freezes beautifully, and then I spend the week eating my way through the rest of it. Now it's currently winter in Melbourne, and I don't imagine that I'm going to get sick again after everything I've just been through. But the second I feel like I've got a scratchy throat or I'm feeling a bit lethargic, I can just pull the rest of this out of the freezer and I'm going to be good to go. Now, the original recipe for this came from a YouTuber called Frugal that I used to follow. Unfortunately, she doesn't make videos for YouTube anymore and she's deleted her entire library. But I saw this on her channel many years ago, and ever since then, it's something that I make about 3 or 4 times a year. I promise you, it is so good. Now, I know in her video, she credited the original recipe, but unfortunately I just can't remember where she got the recipe from, and the video is no longer available to check. So let's crack on while I've still got the energy. I almost can't fit all the ingredients into the shot, there's so many of them, but look how gorgeous and healthy this is. There were actually quite a few things in here that were available during the war. Starting here, we've got a big gorgeous bowl of fresh organic kale. I've got half of a small red cabbage here, 1 large sweet potato that's been cubed, 3 medium carrots, and here I've chopped up 2 medium-sized onions. You guys, this is an entire bulb of garlic. This is the first time I have used garlic this year, and I am so freaking excited. It smells amazing. We've got some coriander here. Now in the US, and I think in Canada as well, you guys call it cilantro. This is just a garnish. We have about a cup of red lentils, which I've already rinsed, and we have 2 cans of chickpeas because I really need the iron. I'm going to cook up a big batch of brown rice to serve it on. So with the rice, the lentils, and the chickpeas, that's a full protein. We're also going to be using a tin of diced tomatoes. I believe this will cost me 6 of my monthly points to use this. You could use fresh tomatoes. I just had this laying around. Of course, the 1 lovely can of coconut milk. As for spices, we're going to be using 3 teaspoons worth of garam masala, as much cayenne pepper as you like, and maybe just over a tablespoon worth of curry powder. And of course, seasoned well with regular salt and pepper. We're also going to be using just a little bit of sugar as well, just to counteract the acidity from the canned tomatoes and to also help bring out the flavor of them. So you'll also need some stock to cook the veggies and the rice in, but I don't currently have any. But I was searching through my pantry and I found half of a container of vegetable stock here. It's just in powdered form. That's what I have on hand. That's what we're going to use. Oh, some Greek yogurt. Again, this is just a garnish. You don't need it. You could use sour cream if you wanted. I just love having it with Greek yogurt as well. I can't believe I almost forgot this as well. You will need some ginger. Now, of course, it's always going to be better to use fresh, but I don't have any. This is what we've got. So as you can see, this is not a wartime dish. There are a lot of ingredients here that they simply wouldn't have had access to back then. So I do hope that you all forgive me in that regard, but my main focus and priority right now is nursing myself back to health as quickly as I possibly can, and the best way I know how to do that is by using ingredients like this. So let's start cooking. So I've just got some oil heating up in the pan, and the first thing you want to do is fry off the onions, the garlic, and all of the spices together. Garlic. I'm basically going to chuck in half a jar of ginger. Give this a stir. I think traditionally you're supposed to fry off the spices first. I don't worry too much about that. I just add it in these initial first stages here. I might need some more curry powder. There's barely a tablespoon in there. Garam masala. Some cayenne. Oh, sweet Lord, how I've missed the... Oh, that smells incredible. Now that these have been cooking down for a little bit, I'm going to add the root vegetables, so the sweet potato and the carrot, and just cook these down for a couple of minutes, not too long. Whenever I make this entire wok is almost going to overflow. I am just going to add a little bit more curry powder because we didn't quite have enough before. You want more curry powder than you do garam masala. So you need around 4 cups of stock for this. Sometimes you might need to add a little bit more, but we're just going to start off with 2. And now it's time to start getting our rainbow on. So we'll add the purple cabbage and all of the kale. A whole lot of food. I know this looks insane right now, but it's going to cook down. I'm going to get creative with 2 wooden spoons here. Just kind of poke and prong it. Now I'm going to add my other 2 cups of stock. We can finally just start combining this properly now. Honestly guys, even just standing over this right now and breathing in all that lovely steam feels amazing.
And the fumes, I have to tell you, the fumes are great for the pores.
Now don't worry if it seems kind of watery at the moment because we've still got to add all of our lentils and they're going to soak all of that up. So next we're going to add our tinned tomatoes. Just give the tin a rinse and put that in as well. Add our lentils as well. Now because I soaked them, they've been sitting a while, they've gone all hard again, so I'm going to just kind of have to break them up again. Then our chickpeas. I mean, just look at how gorgeous this looks. And mix it all through. Next, I'm just going to add some sugar. I'm just going to eyeball it, aiming for about a tablespoon. Mix that all through. So at this stage, I just turn the heat down a little bit, and basically you want the lentils to be submerged so they cook properly. If you don't quite have enough liquid at this stage, just add a little bit more. I think I've got about half of an inch to play with here. That's how full this wok is. We still need to add our coconut milk. I'm just going to do a quick taste test for salt. Oh, that is stunning. At this stage, I don't think we'd even need salt because of the stock that we used earlier. But for now, I just want to let this simmer down a little bit until the lentils have absorbed most of the liquid that's in here. It shouldn't take too long. So it's been about 7 minutes now. I've just been cooking this on a low heat. So the lentils are done. Now it's time to add our coconut milk. I don't know how long this can has been in my pantry for. Quite some time now. It's still good though. By the way, I just taste tested this with all of the components. I cannot tell you how much my heart sang tasting garlic and ginger and curry and all of these amazing flavors all wrapped into one once again. This is one of my top 3 favorite dishes of all time. This is done now, so I've just turned the heat off. It's spicy and salty and sweet and just everything that you want from a curry. I almost forgot about the rice. I prefer brown rice myself. I just eyeballed about 2 cups worth here. Foolproof method of cooking brown rice. Just bring a large pot of water to the boil. Now I added some stock powder to that, which is what you can see floating on the top. So I'm going to wash the rice, of course, but once this pot comes to a boil, I'm just going to dump the rice in there, cook it for 30 minutes, drain it, then stick the rice back in there with the lid on for another 10 minutes to finish off steaming. Perfect brown rice every single time. I've been making it this way for years and years. It's never let me down. I guess I'll see you back here when it's time to assemble everything. Okay, it's finally ready. I simply cannot wait to get stuck in this, so I'm going to try and wrap this up quickly. It's served on a bed of brown rice, which I hope you can see is kind of poking out just underneath there. And now we're just going to top this off with a very healthy dollop of Greek yogurt. Maybe 2, why not? And a healthy sprinkling of coriander. This is exactly what my body needs right now. You guys, I promise you, if you try this recipe will forever be in your repertoire. It's cost effective, it's extremely healthy, and you could easily feed a large family with this. As for the rice, I like to bulk cook it. Once it cools down, if you store it in an airtight container and refrigerate it, it should last up to 5 days. I've had absolutely no issues eating it on day 5. Just make sure that when it comes to reheating it, it's heated all the way through properly. But of course, always give it the smell test, and if it smells a little bit off or if you're unsure, don't take the risk, just toss it and make some more. But I've never had any issues with it. Anyways, my body simply cannot wait a second longer. I need to go and eat this.
Okay, so we're back to Sunday the 30th of June. I've fully recovered, I'm feeling great, and I just wanted to end the video on a high note. So I ended up spending 2 straight weeks eating rainbow dunsuk for my dinners, and I cannot tell you how good I felt afterwards. It truly felt like the glory of my youth had been restored. It was amazing, and it had me feeling right as rain in no time at all. So I highly recommend that you go and make it. Now, I've just been going through the Rolodex in my mind, trying to think of a movie clip that would accurately depict how I felt before and after eating rainbow dunsuk, and I think I found one. That's exactly how I felt about eating the rainbow dunsuk. So at this stage, I'd be really curious to hear from you all in regards to how much money you could potentially save if you were to give up coffee, takeout, or just something you love for an entire year. And would it be worth it? Because I didn't expect I'd be saving so much money from what I previously considered to be small indulgences. Really blew my mind. But this, I can promise you, on the 1st of January 2025, I'm going to drink a barrel of coffee and order 17 pizzas. But until then, we have another 6 months of rationing to get through. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for sticking around. It's been lovely to see you all again, and until next time,
Keep calm and never forget, I gave up coffee.